Okay. Well, again, thank you all for joining. Sorry for the rough starts, but again, promises to be a good meeting. We've got some really fun talks, some folks from the community who are using Linkerd who are going to tell you about how they're, what they're doing, how they've deployed it to a massive operation. And we're also going to get a peek from the inside with Tarun, who's going to talk to us about some of the work that's happening on the Linkerd side, some of the decisions that are being made with respect to changing versions of traffic split. But I'm not going to get ahead of myself. I'm going to let Tarun explain that all to you. So let's start with some of the housekeeping stuff. The agenda is we're going to do news and updates. We'll have a roadmap update from Oliver. He'll give us some info that, well, I don't have any spoilers, but it's fun to talk about the roadmap. We'll talk about Linkerd at Kubecon. That's really one of the really exciting things that's happening in the next couple of weeks. The community member that I mentioned is Frederick from LCAP. And then Tarun will talk with about 2.10.1 and some traffic split stuff. And then whatever we have time for with regard to Q&A, we'll get to, but we also want to announce our Linkerd Hero for April. So we've got 3 awesome folks who participated, and we really want to honor them. And we'll show you what the community voted for. So let's get started. We'll start off with some information about the Linkerd Community Anchor Program. This is for folks in the Linkerd community who are doing interesting stuff, things that you want to share that you're working on. And so good examples of this are Frederick, who we're going to talk to. And then when I show you just this massive list of folks who are talking about Linkerd at KubeCon and Service MeshCon, you're going to see like these are folks who are either already anchors or eligible to be anchors because they are recognized experts with Linkerd. They're telling their story both on blog posts at KubeCon specifically or other meetups or webinars. And as you develop your content, we'll be here to help you shape your story to tell your story. So if you want more information about that, check us out at linkerd.io community/anchor. And you don't have to remember that URL. There are links on there that'll help you click through to it. If you haven't participated yet, please do in our 2021 Linkerd user survey. This helps us to make Linkerd even better for you. You know that the design principles, or some of you may know the design principles of Linkerd are to be easy to use, low configuration, and you'll start seeing the benefits of using it as soon as you deploy it. We want to make that better if that's possible, and we can only do that if you give us your feedback. So please take a look at this if you haven't already, and give us your info or your feedback. So let's move on to news and updates. Oliver, can I kick it over to you for some roadmap and engineering updates?
Sure. As some of you know, as hopefully many of you know, we started kind of meeting regularly with a steering committee. So this is a group of folks who are in production with Linkerd and kind of have a vested interest in making sure the project continues to head in a good direction as we grow. And so one of the first bits of feedback we got from them was it'd be great if we had a published roadmap. And of course, we're in the process of submitting Linkerd for CNCF graduation. So there's a PR up on the TOC repo that I recommend you go flood with positive emojis. But part of that is that we're trying to communicate our roadmap a little better. And so we added a roadmap into the Linkerd 2 repo about 2 weeks ago, maybe a little bit more than that. And so the first thing we're focused on in that roadmap is what I'm calling server-side policy. And so this first use case for that is really authorization, being able to say the service can talk to that service, or really being able to say this service accepts connections from these types of other services. And so a lot of Linkerd's policy and configuration service profile stuff has been based on the client side. So things like retries and timeouts are largely client side features. There is a little bit of server support for that, but it's kind of shoehorned in. And things like traffic split, all of those are client-side behaviors. And so, and where we do have any kind of server-side configuration, it's really based on annotation. So it applies to the whole workload and isn't really granular. So if you have multiple ports, there's no way to kind of differentiate which traffic it's associated with which ports. And so we've been putting together some prototypes to figure out our path forward for there. I think we'll have a little bit more to share publicly in the coming days, hopefully. So that prototype's been making progress over the last couple of weeks, and I think we'll have some proposals to share with the community soon once we've got our ducks in a row. But really, this is going to introduce new CRDs for Linkerd. Sorry. And there's going to be some new optional primitives that you can use for this. They're not going to be required for getting started or anything like that. But as we introduce these new primitives, we're also realizing that the existing service profile CRD is, it's quite old now. It's like 2 years old, I would assume, at least. And we've learned a lot since then. And as we introduce these new primitives, we want to probably rev those APIs as well. And so I like to follow that with client-side policy and doing client-side policy in a way that lets us more flexibly extend it. So to support things like circuit breakers, as we start to deal with non-cluster resources, so talking to things outside the cluster, being able to say that everything going off the cluster must be TLS'd, things like that. So there's, a lot. Probably the first bit of that is figuring out a deprecation cycle for service profile resources and introducing new resources that are going to replace that, and kind of building a roadmap around how we grow that. One of the other things I'd really like to address is that the proxy doesn't currently support retries for anything with a payload. And so this is because we don't want to, we haven't wanted to solve how we do buffering, right? So if you send us very large payloads, we don't want to have to buffer those all and grow the memory size of the proxy just to do retries. But for gRPC especially, this is a real drawback because all gRPC requests necessarily have some payload associated with them. So we really want to support retries for gRPC, but I think that we'll probably follow the client-side policy work as we change how our retries are defined and probably how routes are defined entirely. And I think we may even find that there are some gRPC specific primitives we want to introduce so that gRPC is really full-featured and not kind of purely defined in terms of HTTP resources, which is how it works today in service profiles. We've had a lot of interest in supporting what folks call mesh expansion, or being able to run Linkerd proxies outside of Kubernetes, really to support MTLS with non-proxy things. And so the big question there that we have to figure out is kind of packaging, right? So the proxy today instruments itself via IP tables. Is that even appropriate for us to do outside the cluster? And so there's some pretty big questions we have to answer in terms of what that looks like. So we'll probably look for design partners that have specific specific requirements. Hold on, I need to go. Okay, it's fine. Finally, there's been a lot of movement in the telemetry space over the past year or so. So the primitives there have been shifting kind of continually. Oh my God, this dog. He really doesn't like people outside. So there's things like open telemetry have changed. So we've started with open census because it was really the only thing available when we were going to this. Open telemetry was like a repo, but there were no APIs for it yet. And since then, there's now open metrics, which seems to try to take all of this, also tracing and metrics and et cetera. And so we're probably not going to be leading that charge, but as we see other ecosystem projects like Prometheus, et cetera, move in that direction, I think we'd like to have a roadmap that goes there. And then finally, this is not everything we're going to do. This is kind of the bigger highlight notes of the types of things I plan that I think we'll be doing over the next year or so. So there's not really a fixed timeline on that. And of course, depends on what other things we have going on. So for instance, we just completed. I guess I'm switching out of roadmap now, but we just completed some fuzz test work. CNCF sponsored the folks at Adalogics to help us write fuzz tests for the proxy and a bunch of the dependencies that we depend on. So things like Hyper, the HTTP library. And we found two, I think, I think we found two actual potential panics in the proxy from that work. There's of course more to do, but now we're integrated in OSS fuzz, so they're constantly throwing a bunch of garbage data at the proxy to flesh things out. And so that was successful, and I will also be expecting kind of a more holistic security audit than we had in the past. So we've had security audits, but they've been mostly focused on very like implementation level features and less threat modeling and kind of architectural security. And so we're going to work with the folks at Trail of Bits, hopefully over the next few months to do that. And depending on what they find, that may alter the roadmap slightly, but I think they're probably complementary work.
Awesome. And I saw that William raised his hand a minute or so ago. Got a question for us, William?
Yeah, I just had a question around 2.11 and server-side policy. Can you talk a little bit about how that's going to be parameterized? Like, how do you select which service? How do you describe which services are allowed to talk to other ones? Can you do it per namespace or per individual services, or what are your thoughts there?
I mean, the stuff's still in flight. I think the current setup that we're targeting, you will be able to do that. So like that specific, like I don't want to pull up the CRDs and go through them in detail right now, but it's the gist is that there are server objects. So a server CRD refers to a set of pods and a port on those pods. So either by name or by number. And so you might have your Prometheus port, everything, or your metrics port is all named the same. And then a set of authorizations which select over servers. And so authorizations, you can think of kind of like role bindings, where you say that this authorization selects the server or refers to the server or the set of servers in the same namespace. And those can either identify other service accounts, to say these service accounts are allowed to talk to this proxy. We'll support kind of arbitrary identity suffixes. So that would allow you to do things like, well, I guess you could do the namespace level selection with that. We were trying to take service account label selectors out of it in the first pass, which would probably be the best way to do that. But I think we'll have some holes in that API that allow for some flexibility more than, I don't know. I guess what we're like, all of that's kind of in scope. We're figuring out the exact ordering and delivery and what, like, so I don't know exactly what's going to be in 2.11. I don't know exactly what's going to be in the first version before we get to 2.11. And so the roadmap or the design kind of can account for all of this, but there's some questions in terms of ordering of features. And then I think the other thing to call out here is that, as we go into the kind of client-side policy, like there's also an opportunity to extract things like routes and have those bind onto these servers as well. So the real goal for what we're doing is to try to like create these new primitives that we can start attaching more things to besides policy. So authorizations are just one thing that you can attach to a server. There should be other things that you can attach to servers in the future that allow you to kind of extend configurability for inbound policy.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. That's quite a bit of updates there. So thanks for that, Oliver. I think going forward, we will continue to give you all updates on the roadmap as they happen. Those will be separate from the engineering updates that Oliver gives regularly. And I put into the chat the link to the roadmap file, the markdown file in the repository. So you can always check that out to see if there are changes going on there as well. So thanks for that, Oliver. Let's move on to the updates about Kubecon. And so we've got our most Linkerd heavy Kubecon yet. And Catherine, do you know if this includes the talks that are in Service Mesh Con as well, or are these just Kubecon talks?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, it's both actually.
It is both. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that I called that out properly.
Yeah.
The whole event, the amazing event that is Kubecon plus Cloud Native Con. So again, it's a virtual event, Kubecon EU this year. If you've got your tickets, you'll be able to see all these talks live. And when I say all these talks, we've got 2 pages of talks going on here. We'll see how Linkerd is being used in academic contexts. William's going to give us his state of the service mesh, which will be enlightening and will tell us more about what we expect to see going forward. Our own Jason is going to talk about debugging Linkerd using TAP, and NetApp's going to talk about adding FIPS 140 support. So that's just a few examples of what's going on, but it's really exciting to see all these folks talking about Linkerd. And it would be remiss of me to not mention the fact that Linkerd is being used to understand and help with the COVID efforts around the world. So check out those talks. I hope that you get a chance to see them live, but if not, I think at some point they will likely be recorded as well. So.
Yeah, and just to note that I think Chris had asked about my experiences with Go versus Rust, and the talk I'm doing at Cloud Native Rust Day was kind of focused on that. So check that out.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. And now we're going to go and chat with our special guest, Frederick. He and I chatted a while back. It's good to see you again, Frederick. You know, you'll have to remind me how we were connected, but once we learned that you were using Linkerd at LCAP, that was really, really impressive. And it's such a large scale retailer. I have so many questions for you. So let's just start with, tell us about yourself, your background, and how you found your way into the CNCF.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Frederick Lingerie. So I'm a developer working in Oslo, Norway. Studied computer science in Oslo and took a final year of my undergraduate at Lingerie University in Australia. So I've been trying to create distributed system for as a consultant for the private and public sector. And for the last years, I'm focusing more on service-oriented architecture and distributed applications. And obviously Kubernetes is a big part of that. So Kubernetes basically entered my scene when I was doing some consultant work for a large power grid operator in Oslo called Hasbronet. Now it's called LDL. Sorry?
What was the first version of Kubernetes that you used? I want to get a sense for how long you've been digging around with Kubernetes.
I think it was 1.5 or something.
Wow. Okay.
So
okay.
That was.
So and how do you pronounce the command line tool that you use to interact with Kubernetes?
Oh, that's a big one. kubectl.
Okay.
Is there an answer on that one? But
there is not. There is not. So you moved into starting to work with LCAP?
Yeah. So yeah, I moved and worked more and more with Kubernetes, and then I worked closely with Microsoft a little bit, and was pitched to talk with Henry Hagnes, which was then a cloud solution architect at Airship Nordic. So they want to be moving their applications over to Kubernetes. because they have been modernizing and trying to write more of their applications on their own, hosted at that time as web apps in Azure, which is fine, but was getting a little bit out of control in terms of cost and also maintenance, and I want a little bit more of the functionality that you get in Kubernetes. So I worked closely with Henry, him and myself for the last 2 years, bringing L-Ship Nordic over to Kubernetes. So yeah, basically L-Ship Nordic is, we like to compare it to Best Buy of the Nordics. So
Yeah.
Linkerd is being rolled out in all of the Nordics now. So it's basically two large projects. So being used by the sales clerks in the stores, but also hosting the kind of microservice architecture behind the scenes as well.
Yeah, and that's I think the part that excited us. Of course, we're excited that Linkerd is working for it's being used in production anywhere. But when you talk about a large scale operation, such how many retail stores are there for Elkip? Do you know?
You're putting me on the spot there, but there's many hundreds.
Okay.
And yeah, and obviously
so
they're quite big online as well.
Yeah. And so that's I mean, that's just, it's really impressive that you built out this scale. First of all, using Kubernetes, that you migrated them over, and then just to pull Linkerd into that scale. When you started working on that project, like what is it that brought you to Linkerd? What were the problems or requirements that you had maybe? And then how did Linkerd solve that for you?
Yeah, there's been definitely a lot of cool projects in the CSF community, but Henry and myself set out with some principles in mind. So we won't just introduce technology for the technology's sake. But there were two problems that we wanted to solve. One being that once we started moving the applications over to Kubernetes, there were no longer the encryption of the traffic. Whereas before, it was obviously encrypted because it was going online and you get the certificates from Azure. So that was a big one. And then was the insights that you wanted to raise the kind of baseline of the metrics that we will provide from the applications without having to bug the developers too much. And we wanted to do that in a kind of aspect-oriented way as well, so that they get a lot of those things for free by just deploying things on Kubernetes. So that's where Linkerd entered the scene, solved those two problems. Yeah.
So it's the security and the observabilities, the mutual TLS, and being able to get the metrics and see the performance. Was there ever a case where you would, let's say, not you, but a new version of a service rolled out and you were able to immediately see from those Linkerd metrics that the service was performing better or not performing as well? Was that a real experience for you?
Yeah, definitely. Something being that if you're not reusing ports correctly, you can run into that port extortion problem. I think that's pretty familiar with a lot of people working on Kubernetes. So it's sufficient for one or two applications to go, to ruin it for a lot of other applications. So to get those connections and metrics into that one is a big part. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so your role in the project was, can you tell us about that?
Like,
were you the architect?
A little bit of everything, I guess.
Okay.
Just a developer together with Henry. So
okay.
Yeah.
So you were developing, you were architecting the system, you were building out. Were you doing DevOps stuff as well? Like, were you building out the infrastructure, building your own clusters, or okay?
Yeah.
So you're doing everything.
It was really fun project, at least.
That sounds like it. Sounds like you were very busy though too.
Yeah.
Well, great. And so now that you've deployed out at Linkerd out at LCAP and that you built out their application, is there more work that you'll be doing there, or are you going to be moving on to a different project?
Yeah, so the the project kind of finished, had a logical finish when Henry left Elkjøp as well. So that was after the kind of Black Friday, which was a fun experience. So that went really smooth, which is cool. So now I'm working for a similar project, but in the insurance space. So that's for If, which is the insurance company for the Nordics as well. And they are really they have extremely high requirements regarding security. So Linkerd is playing a huge role there as well, in the same way that they did at Elkjøp.
Yeah, so that's interesting that you bring that up. Oftentimes when folks ask me about Linkerd and specifically around mutual TLS, one of the use cases is for the security that is either a requirement of the company or is a requirement by regulation. So for insurance in the Nordics, is that a government regulation or is that a company regulation?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure,
okay.
To be honest. It's definitely one for the company. If that comes from the government, I'm not sure.
Got it. Yeah, that's great. So we'll be excited to get an update from you on that project at some point. What can you share about your experience with Linkerd, with rolling it out? And so the reason that I ask is at the beginning, we asked folks to fill out the survey, Linkerd 2021 survey. And so if you were to change anything about Linkerd, or if you were, what would have made your life different or easier or better? What would you change about Linkerd?
Not much, to be honest. I think actually
we like to hear that.
The one small thing that actually now fixed in the later version that I'm now deploying at If was to make it even more minimal in the initial deployment. So now we can have those add-ons, right, in terms of the Grafana and the Prometheus one. But no, I think it really aligned well with the principle that we want to introduce technology that actually solves problems that we have, and not have the unnecessary complexity in addition to that.
That is awesome. That's one of the goals that we strive for is solving real world problems for folks. Yeah. And so it's endearing to hear that that's actually happening out there in the world. Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, something that we also saw moving along, just to mention that this in the community, that the documentation with Linkerd is also first class. I have to say, really good documentation. It's always good that the project has cool and good technology, but if the documentation is lacking, it's a kind of a bummer. But the documentation, as I said, more than once I had some questions, and then I just kept on reading, and I saw the documentation actually answering exactly the question I had. And the few times it didn't mention or had the answers, the community is super welcome, really fast. So
that's really good to hear, and I can't help but notice we've got Richard over, he's in the meeting as well, and I know that there's an outstanding PR that is waiting approval, and so that's just a way to call out folks in the community. Thank you, Frederick, for pointing out that the community is such a helpful place, and I think everybody here should be take a little bit of pat yourselves on the back, because I look around and I see a lot of faces that I know are helping out either on Docs or in Slack, and so that comment right there from Frederick really is like, it shows you that the work that's being done is actually helpful and useful. So yeah, that's great. Any additional notes, thoughts, words you want to add for folks here, Frederick?
No, not really. We've been super pleased with Linkerd. We're definitely going to use it on new projects as well. And
good.
Yeah, I have
well,
to say, I really like the hopefully I didn't get around to do that at Elkjøp, but I hopefully get around to do it this time around, was to use it for gRPC, so for inbound communication. And also really pleased to see that also Linkerd is embracing the service mesh interface specification. That makes it really, really good.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you for your time so much. It was really great chatting with you, and you actually set up our next conversation perfectly, because Tarun is going to talk to us about the extension model. He's going to talk to us about 2.10.1, and I think he might even have time to talk about SMI a little bit. So thank you again, Frederick. We will definitely be chatting with you in Slack and online. As you move on to your new project, please reach out to the community for help. We're always here to help you. So thanks for your time, and let's move on to Tarun.
Thanks.
Tarun, thank you so much for joining us. I know that it's late your time. You're always so gracious to help us out. For those of you who don't know, Tarun's in. Are you in New Delhi?
No, Hyderabad.
Hyderabad. Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I for some reason I thought you said that you were in New Delhi. So it's late. That's the point. So thanks for joining us. Talk to us about what you're working on. What's happening in your world?
Yep. So currently I've been really into the whole SMA extension stuff, right? So for example, like previously we only supported till V1 Alpha 1. So with 2.10.1, we added support for V1 Alpha 2, and also we started with Linkerd 2.9, I guess. We had this whole new extension model, right? To actually decouple components that we don't think add value in the default case, right? When you would install Linkerd in the default way, you would want to add stuff as you need, not have everything packaged into the same thing, right? So with the whole new extension model, this has been possible now that we have Viz Jaeger extension. So we would like to also have SMA as an extension, right? So that you would only install the extension when you would want to do when you would want to apply the SMA resources, and not in the default install. You could still use service profiles and all the default Linkerd primitives and add stuff like SMA as you need. So currently I've been working on that, and also some changes to destination, etc., to make this all work.
Gotcha. So I know that there's been a GitHub issue open for upgrading the traffic split version for a while. What are the challenges around upgrading an API version?
I think this should be one of the problem into that whole caching and naming thing, right? There's this code, right? Like naming and caching. It should also have versioning in there.
Okay.
So the issue was that so currently in Linkerd we support traffic split V1 Alpha 1 only, and the SMA extension and the SMA community moved further, obviously, with other changes, etc., with other resources too. So with V1 Alpha and the time is here to actually depreciate V1 Alpha 1. V1 Alpha 2 is just V1 Alpha 1 with some different with a type change for weight, essentially. So now we have two resources which are very equal, two versions which are pretty equal, but the implementation is different. But from outside, these are just weights. So the problem that we wanted to solve was that to have a way for Linkerd to support both of these versions, right? So that if you're using V1 Alpha 1, you should not run through in a single version and update it to V1 Alpha 2 before the next version. So we wanted to give users some time before we follow the same deprecation cycle. So the problem was here to support both of the versions at a time. Usually in the Kubernetes world, this is solved with the whole webhooks thing, right? There are conversion webhooks which allow you to convert resources from one version to another. But we felt it as a bit too complicated, right? Even for the user, right? Now there is whole new additional component that you have to run that does the conversion from one version to another version, etc. So we wanted to do a simpler way without having to push that overhead to the user, essentially. And even adding in another component is also a problem for us. Just a webhook that changes a single type did not feel that useful, essentially, and goes against the whole simplicity model, right? So we updated our whole logic. it wasn't that hard of a change, but we updated the destination logic to essentially understand which version of the CRD that you're applying and choose a and understand that this type varies in this way. So essentially we pull that problem or the logic into destination. So that is done. So essentially now you don't have to do anything. There is no conversion webhook, etc. Now if you install Linkerd 2.10.1, you get support for both the versions without having to do anything. So that is one change that went to 2.10.1.
Gotcha. So that you answered the next question that I was going to ask is, how do these changes impact current users of Traffic Split? And so what I heard you say is that people who are currently using Traffic Split, the V1 Alpha 1, they'll be just fine, and they can also upgrade to V1 Alpha 2 if they want to.
Yep.
So that's part of the deprecation cycle for V1 Alpha 1 in Linkerd.
That is not planned yet. We'll update an issue and we'll also add some check functionality once that is it. Yeah, that is not finalized yet on when do we depreciate V1 Alpha.
Awesome. Very cool. It's exciting stuff. Like I said, I know that this ticket's been, or the issue has been open for a bit. And so to see it moving forward, that's awesome that you're working on it. So we're going to move into, again, apologies that we had a slow start. So any quick thoughts on 2.10.1, Tarun, that you want to share? Yep.
2.10.1 is actually one of the tightly packed minor releases that we have, I guess. There are improvements around like all of the control plane components, the CLI, the proxy too. So for example, in the control plane, so there are these edge cases, right? With Kubernetes having a lot of networking options, there are always these edge cases that the destination have missed or something like that. So we added support for host IP lookups and things like that. So these are all not widely used, but still there have been issues and we were finally able to figure out. So I think the reason for doing a 2.10 was improvements or bug fixes that we thought should not wait a full stable release, right? Because that will be a while. So 2.10 is just that and some bug fixes that most of the users have been reporting, that the users reported essentially.
And we'll probably do a 2.10.2 next week, is my guess. With some proxy fixes we've gotten from issues reported.
Great. Well, that's all. These all sound like signs of a healthy, forward-moving project. So your work is greatly appreciated on that. And everybody here you look at the change list for 2.10.1, and like you said, it's pretty tightly packed. There are a lot of folks on there who got shout outs for helping to contribute to that release. So yeah, thanks everybody. All right, Tarun, well, I appreciate your time. It was great talking with you. I hope you get some sleep soon. It's time to move on to our Lingerie Heroes. So we had 3 great nominees this month. I see Rio here, he's joined us. Very exciting. We've got Ali Arif was nominated as well. And then actually, I don't have my notes in front of me, but who is it, Catherine?
Saim.
That's right, Saim, who's been putting out a lot of content. So do we have the final votes in? We still haven't gotten our drum roll yet, have we?
We have now.
Okay, there we go. And the winner is Rio. Look at that. All right. Awesome. So I have seen Rio donating his time both in Linkerd Slack, and I think he's submitted quite a few PRs. So really awesome. We appreciate your help and really just you being part of the community in general. It really means a lot. It builds the strength of the community. And yeah, so I don't know, you got some thoughts? What would you like to tell us about how do you feel about being nominated as
I also want to say
hero?
Thanks for writing really good issues. The helpful descriptive bug reports go a long way to making us easy for us to fix things.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to continue on that. I mean, I'm a developer myself, so I know how frustrating it is when you have Heisenbugs leveraging the power of Kubernetes and containers to create reproducible cases. That's just amazing from a developer's perspective. If you have people who know how to actually submit those bug reports, yeah. But yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot. I really didn't expect something like this to happen because I tend to be all over the place when it comes to helping people in chats and whatnot. But I do really like Linkerd and how this community is being built up. So yeah.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it a lot. I've seen you like even on the weekends answering questions out there. So that's pretty powerful stuff. So we really appreciate it. And again, we appreciate all the folks who were nominated as heroes. Thanks for making the community awesome. It's really, really just, it makes it a fun place to be for everybody, I think. So great.
Even for babies.
Even for, that's right.
Look at that. Linkerd
yeah.
branded baby. That is excellent.
Very much so, yeah.
Solid stuff. Okay, we've got time for probably 1 or 2 questions. If y'all if you just have general questions, this doesn't have to be something to try and stump the maintainer. That's always the fun aspect of this. But just if you've got a question, raise your hand or you can put it in chat. Yeah, anything, anyone?
Yeah, we'd just like to, oh, sorry, I go first.
Nope. Okay.
I just wanted to say a big thank you to basically community and I think especially Kevin, who's picking us up for backporting the fix from the destination controller from 210 to 295, so we can also still use it in our ancient, old, rusty Kubernetes 115 cluster until we finally will be able to upgrade. That's just great.
I remember there were some conversations about a 295 going out, so that's great. I'm glad it's going to help you out. Again, Christian, you've been an amazing member of the community as well, always giving us good feedback. And
thank you.
Not unlike Frederick, one of the first folks to run Linkerd in a very significant scale application. So yeah, we really appreciate it. And we appreciate your Linkerd branded baby, of course.
I appreciate the the onesie.
I will point out though that it was an awesome sentiment. It still wasn't a question. So anybody want to try and stump the maintainer?
I think Rio has his hand raised.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, as much as I like answering questions, I have a lot of them usually. So you might have seen in the chat yesterday, I started dabbling with multi-cluster, and I'm having a bit of a hard time visualizing the request flow and how the gateway is meant to operate, and also like which parts of the 2 Kubernetes clusters need to be open. So as I think I'm understanding it right now as the gateway being an entry-only component, basically. So if cluster East wants to talk to cluster West, West needs to have a gateway, but the other way around wouldn't work at that point. Cluster East would also need a gateway. It doesn't work like a bidirectional stream like in gRPC, for example. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that's right. So the kind of architecture there is that, and actually we're working on improving this for 2.11 to support headless services for stateful sets as well. But the basic setup is that, one, we want this to work in kind of arbitrary network topologies. So as long as you can get an IP that you can access from another cluster, that we can connect things. And then the way this works is that as we mirror services over, right? So there's a service mirror component that watches another cluster's API and imports service references in that source cluster. That creates services with this endpoint, and that endpoint is the gateway service. And so as you, then you send, or you connect to the gateway. That's just a specialized proxy. There's an Nginx container that runs in it in 2.10, but that's just for health checking, and we removed it in 2.11. So really, this is a special proxy with a special inbound configuration that says, when I get connections that have this protocol upgrade, so in 2.10 we introduced this protocol upgrading for TCP, and we support TCP multi-cluster. And there's some metadata in that connection that says the target you're actually talking to is the service in the cluster. And we want that so that all the load balancing is happening local within the cluster, and you don't have a client that's like across a large network gap that has to do load balancing among endpoints in a cluster. So yeah, we basically, you're right, the gateway is there just as kind of an inbound, kind of like an ingress, but without the routing config, just as a forwarding proxy to local services. The other implication of that is also that the identity is only, like, you can have basically different identity domains, and only the gateway has to be part of both trust anchors for this to work. But that's not really
right, because it's on that edge that the identity is actually verified. I'm actually stuck on that point now, where it seems that the probe from the source cluster does not send any identity information to the target cluster, which means that the connection basically bounces off. I'm not really sure what that's about, but yeah, I've just been at it for half a day, so.
I would double check that you actually have a proxy on the prober and the service mirror, and I'm sure there's some folks in Slack or Discord that could help think through a little bit more deeply.
Yes, thanks.
Matei and I have been discussing the same question, so we will definitely be in Slack to chat with you and work through this with you.
Yeah, Matei's doing a bunch of the work for headless services, so he's a good person to bother about this.
Yeah, much appreciated. In its current state, it might not actually be for us, fully private cluster, and I think it also requires both clusters to have the API, Kubernetes API available to be able to do mirroring on both sides. So we'll have to see, but nonetheless, it's really nice to get it to work eventually.
Yeah, and then again, I think if there are ways that we could evolve this to support more use cases, we're open to it. Just it's there.
Yeah,
we're trying to be incremental, right? Get it working, and then make it general.
Yeah, exactly. Initially, I thought it was more like a tunnel, but I mean, I guess it'll get there eventually. Yeah.
Great. Well, I hate to cut you off. That was a great question, and I'm glad that it's recorded in perpetuity so that we have this answer that other folks can listen to as well. I really want to, again, thank everybody for being here. It's so great to see the community alive and growing. And if you have any questions, Oliver already mentioned that we're on Slack, and we've got our Discord channel as well. I think the goal is to move over to Discord fully at some point, but we'll still help be around, because I know some folks don't have access to Discord where they do have access to Slack. So I think that's the last of my slides. We've got our Linkerd customers. If you want your name on here, let us know. We'll get you added. And yeah, thanks again, everybody. Thanks for your time. Thanks for everybody's hard work that went into making this happen. One last apology for the delay at the beginning. Thanks for being flexible, everybody. So take care. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Have a good one.
Bye. Have a nice day.